This is the explanation of the active learning exercise. So let's begin by looking at the possibilities that people in the USA could achieve. So as the exercise explains, USA has 50,000 labor hours. That's just something that's a given for this particular exercise. And we also know about the US that it takes 100 hours to produce one computer, or it takes 10 hours to produce 1 ton of wheat. That's right, ton of wheat. So what are the possibilities in the US? What could US possibly do when choosing to produce these two types of goods? Well, they can produce either computers or wheat. And in what amounts? That's what we're about to determine here in this exercise. So first of all, suppose that the US says, okay, we're just going to produce 0 computers. All right, so how much wheat can the US produce? Well, as you know, US has 50,000 labor hours. Let's just write 50,000 hours here. And it takes 10 hours to produce a ton of wheat. So therefore, 50,000 divided by 10 is 5,000 tons of wheat. So US could produce 5,000 tons of wheat if it chooses to produce 0 computers. The available time permits US to produce this much wheat. For simplicity and explanation, we can place this particular option on a production possibilities frontier, where we relate amount of wheat that can be produced to amount of computers that can be produced. So this point is 0 computers, so we'll put a 0 down here, and 5,000 tons of wheat. So we'll put 5,000 here on the top. That's the maximum that we can produce. And it's always important to draw charts to scale. So let's also split the rest of the axis here. So this would be 2,000. This would be 4,000, right? And so then this becomes 3,000. And I want you guys to do this on paper also as you're watching this. And 1,000. All right. So this particular point where US produces 0 tons of 0 computers and 5,000 tons of wheat would be, let's call it point A. Okay. And where is it located on this chart that we're drawing? It's located right here. 0 computers and 5,000 tons of wheat. So let's even give it a little name here, point A. All right. Okay. What other options does US have? Well, what if US decided to produce nothing but wheat? Sorry, nothing but computers. So you produce 0 tons of wheat. Let's put that down here somewhere. 0 tons of wheat. And the question is, how many computers can US produce? Well, again, with 50,000 labor hours, knowing that it takes 100 hours to produce a computer, so 100 hours per computer, 50,000 hours can be spent in producing how many computers? 500 computers. Okay, so let's plot that point somewhere here. Let's just put 500 somewhere here. Again, let's split the rest of the axes evenly. If that's 5,000, then this would be 2,500, so 2,000 is going to be somewhere here. That means 4,000 is going to be somewhere here. Right, and we can leave the rest for later. So our point of 500 computers and 0 tons of wheat will be marked right here. Okay, 0 meaning 0 tons of wheat. That means that it's going to be 0 units up. And how many units to the right? 500 units to the right. Looks like I made a little mistake here. So let's take off the 0. So it should be 200 and 400 instead of 2,000 and 4,000. So 200, 400, 500. Okay. So let's name this point just like I did earlier with the other point. So if that was point A, then why don't we call this point B here? So this is our point B. And as the previous chapter indicated, and as we know from Production Possibilities Frontier, really it's possible to produce any combination of these two goods, computers or wheat, as in this example. So for example, if US split its total labor hours into 2, producing half of computers and half of wheat, then we could see what the possibilities would be. So let's say 25,000 hours would go to producing wheat, and it takes 10 hours to produce a ton of wheat. Then 25,000 divided by 10 would be 2,500 tons of wheat. And on the other hand, the remaining 25,000 hours could be going to computer production, and it takes 100 hours to produce a computer. Therefore, how much computers could be made? Well, 250 computers could be made. Right? So this point becomes something like this. US could make 250 computers and 2,500 tons of wheat. So where is this point? Well, this must be 300 right here. This must be 100 right here. So at 250 would be right here somewhere. And similarly, 2,500 tons of wheat would be right here. So this is the point that we have just drawn, where US splits half of its time into wheat production and half of its time into computer production. So why don't we name this point also? Let's name this point C and plot C right here. Okay. Okay, now we finally get to the question of active learning. So the question was, if US wants to produce 3,400 tons of wheat, then how many computers can US also make? And we can really go about this two ways. We can try to first look on the chart and say 3,400 is going to be somewhere right here. So then, therefore, what number does this correspond to down here on the horizontal axis? Or we can do it numerically. So let's really do it both ways. All right, so let's start this way. 3,400 tons of wheat. Well, how many hours will it take to produce 3,400 tons of wheat? 3,400 tons of wheat times 10 hours per producing ton of wheat. That's going to take us 34,000 hours. Let's say hours used. Okay? Now, how many total hours are available? 50,000 hours are available. Okay, so if 34,000 hours are used, then how many are remaining? That means we have 16,000 hours that are available or remaining. 15,000 hours are available. And then the question is, okay, what can we do in those 16,000 hours? And as we have already done, let's again look at what can be done in those 16,000 hours. So in 16,000 hours, when it takes 100 hours to produce a computer, then how many computers can be made? 160 computers. All right. So what we have learned is that if US wants to produce 3,400 tons of wheat, it can also produce 160 computers. So that point would be, we can write this possibility in here, 3,400 tons of wheat and 160 computers simultaneously. So let's call that point D. And let's see where it's located on our axis. It's going to be somewhere here. Let us mark it just like we have marked the other points. Point is somewhere here, where there's 3,400 tons and 160 computers. So the point's right here. Okay, so that's the answer to the question. If US wants to produce 3,400 tons of wheat, it can also produce 160 computers. And we calculated that simply by looking at the given amount of labor hours that are necessary to produce a particular output in the United States.